Welcome, folks, to the Tech Detonator Show. Today's episode is a very special one because our guest is Derek Boutang. He is the head of engineering in the customer department at SkipTheDishes. He manages and leads more than 100 software developers. He has a very extensive, rich, and varied background in finance and computing world. So today we had a very good conversation about the points of how you handle your employees' mental health, how the Skip the Dishes employee culture works out, how they are looking at out the future options and future developers. So if you are a job seeker in the tech world, this episode is for you. If you are looking to get hired at Skip the Dishes, this podcast is for you. And if you are a leader in the tech world, in the software world, this podcast is for you. So let's go and enjoy this podcast together. Just a quick notice, do not forget to like and subscribe our podcast. So you have had a huge variety of experiences in your
Thank you.
career,
Yeah.
and especially you have two experiences like finance and tech. Since more than 20 plus years you have been working after you graduated. So would you want to put more emphasis on what you like doing and how was the ride for you from the
Okay. So thank you. For those who don't know me, I like you described in some of the comments earlier about how my background was rich and varied, and I think that is the case. I started my career in management consulting, actually, and I'm a chartered professional accountant by training. Um, Moved into management consulting, then into government, spent some time in education as well before coming to Skip the Dishes. So also along the way pulled a project management professional designation, did a teacher certificate or certificate in adult education, taught for a while and whatnot. So I have had a very extensive sort of a background. And you asked me sort of which do I prefer, finance or technology, and I would I dither a little bit on that because I don't think it's one or the other, especially not these days. Nowadays, you can't really do finance at scale without having technology. And I've found in my career that being finance aware has certainly helped me in all of the things that I've done. Knowing and understanding how the money works is a really important part of my job now as head of engineering, and helping to be able to help my developers understand that is also good for the company as a whole, and it's good for them individually in their careers as well. So, yeah, no clear answer on that one.
Well, awesome. So, with this experience, you have right now you're heading a big team of developers across the entire country, with many cities as we just talked about, right? So, how what motivated you to be a leader first of all, and so what are the pros and cons of being a leader and managing people?
um, so I think being a leader is really an important role. It took me a long time to understand actually even what that meant. You'll find that I answer a lot of questions from my background, but my background is very academic. Education is very important to me. I believe it's important to have frameworks and understandings of how things fit into the bigger role. So in the academic world, they'll often distinguish between management and leadership. And I don't draw the line as clearly as some of the academic folks do around that. But I think it is important to understand when you need management and when you need leadership. And so some of the pros and cons around that, I think, are where you have far too much of one and not enough of the other, and far too much of the other and not enough of the one. So, we'll often find that managers will want to get very involved in the details and micromanage their staff and whatnot, which is there you probably have too much management and not enough leadership. The other challenge in that role is that you'll often have people who say, we're going to do this next great thing in the next 25 days, go to it. And there I think you have too much leadership and not enough management, because you need a healthy balance of both in order to be effective. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but that's sort of would be my take on it. How does it affect me and where I want it to go? For me, a really important kind of a concept is something that Bill Gates said like 25 plus years ago. He talked about how you manage your information determines whether you win or lose. And that always struck me, and it's been something that I've used to try and pattern my career, because I think that's really, really very important as a concept. It influences my approach to leadership and technology as well, because I don't think there's only ever one right way to do anything. So when you talk about, which I prefer, leadership or management or technology, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about, fintech or technology. I don't think you can ever have one without the other. I'm a better leader these days because I understand the technology parts of the job, and I'd like to think it helps me get respect from the developers that I work with, that I can sort of go in and look at their code and understand at least a little bit about what they're talking about, and I can feel in support for them. But at the other side of it is knowing the role of a leader and how my job is to support them and to remove some of the barriers that they might not worry about or see, so that they can focus more on the technology side, I think is important as well. And I gain tremendous satisfaction from being able to do both. And ideally, if you can get that satisfaction from doing both, I think it's a great spot to be in.
That's just very insightful, to be honest. Great insights about how you have to have a strict balance. You have to find the right pitch. It takes some time to find the pitch of the good balance, right?
Yes.
And that comes from experience, obviously. So let's look into your role here at Skip. You are managing a big team of developers, and so what are the practices that Skip follows? What are the cornerstone practices specifically for the employees that the Skip follows, so that you can get innovation out of your employees, as well as you can give them comfort of being very good at this place?
Yeah. So first of all, I get a lot of help from my managers. So I need to do a special shout out to them. It's part of that balance you talked about management and leadership. In the teams that I'm responsible for, we have about 115 developers spread out over about 14 teams now. So I have a couple of senior technology managers to help me manage those, and they manage about 6 or 7 technical managers themselves, and then each technical manager has their own team to worry about. So that support that I get is huge. So let me put that out there first. Second thing, just kind of generally, you asked me specifically about techniques and what do we do, and I think it's important also for me to say that I think best practices are very rarely new practices. So I don't think we do anything that's necessarily super innovative or super out there in terms of how we encourage people to be effective and to perform well. But I think it kind of boils down to 2 things overall for us and some of the things that we worry about. The first is just we take a very general people-centered approach to management. We work with people, understand what they need, what their passions are, what drives them, what interests them, and then we try and find work for them that kind of feeds those passions. And while we do that, we check in with them regularly. So we have a culture in our organization of having regular one-on-ones between managers and developers. I have that with my boss, and he has that with his boss, and whatnot. So it goes throughout the entire organization. Those check-ins are important because it allows the managers to let the individual contributors know that they're part of a bigger whole, that they can depend on us and that we can depend on them, and that team aspect is important. So for me, first things first is the people-centered approach. And then you also asked about innovation, and that kind of brings me to the second part. I think you need to build time and support for innovation. So it can't be just something that you showed at people, hey, be innovative, hey, be innovative, hey, be innovative. You need to support that. And so here at Skip, we have a very large emphasis on learning, training, and development. We make time and materials available to developers. So things like O'Reilly subscriptions. So you get access to sort of the O'Reilly library of books and whatnot, access to things like LinkedIn Learning or whatnot. We have monthly innovation days where we create time on the schedule for developers to pursue passion projects about things that they think will either help them or help the company. And many of those passion projects actually eventually end up making it into our live software. We have company-wide quarterly hackathons and things like that, again, to encourage and foster innovation. So those are a couple of things that we do. One is kind of supporting people, but then making and creating the conditions for them to try to be successful and to be innovative.
That's a very great strategy to extract the innovation out of your employees. So, talking about innovation and culture, let's go to your team. How do you build the culture for your team to motivate your big team, 100 plus members of your team, and also give them the job satisfaction and the mental, there was a mental talk recently in the tech community. How do you give them that what is your special things you've built?
So I think it's important for me to start just by highlighting how and stressing how important culture actually is. Culture isn't everything that you do. It's kind of defines you. It oozes out of you in your every action. So it's not something you can just adopt. And that too took me a long time to learn. So I like to think about that like the difference between a radish and a carrot, right? You know, a radish is sort of red on the outside, but different on the inside. But the carrot is orange through and through. And so for me, culture is the orange in the carrot. Now, obviously, as you talk about that, like consistency and integration are really both important in that. So it's not about just one particular thing or another. It's about whether your general approaches and responses are reliable and predictable, and do they make sense in the broader whole. But you asked me for some specifics, so let me talk about some specifics. So the first thing I've already mentioned are people-centered approach, right? I think that's really important. I talked about the regular one-on-ones and how our managers and staff connect regularly. That's really important to make sure that you have consistent messaging throughout, and that if there are concerns, that those are able to be raised, and that you build a series of relationships that are built around honesty, acceptance, trust, and whatnot. Those set of one-on-ones and those set of administrative practices that we have, and I think they're so fundamental because they let us focus on both performance and job satisfaction, like you talked about. So that's kind of overall the framework in which we work. A specific practice I think that really supports that is also embedded in our culture is the fact that we are strong believers in the agile methodology, and often how that's defined in the sprint cycle. So for me, that sprint cadence I find is a really good one for focusing on performance and job satisfaction. So if you think about that on a regular basis, so for us it's usually every 2 weeks, you first get involved with your team and you do a little bit of planning, and then you agree on what are we going to work on right now, and then every day you have a stand-up meeting where you check in with people, and it's more than just, hey, I'm here today. It's, what are I working on yesterday? What am I working on today? What blockers do I have in order to that I'm going to need help with, right? That again focuses everybody on what are we doing, what's the task at hand, and where are we at right now. You do that on a regular basis. Then as your sprint is winding up, you have a review meeting that looks at how did we do. Did we achieve the goals that we were trying to achieve? Did we not? And then you have, following that, a retrospective where either if you didn't achieve your goals or if you did, but you think you could do better, you get together as a group and you talk about that. And you always focus that on things sort of moving forward and whatnot. That entire cycle, that entire set of meetings, those regular check-ins, that's all built around performance and then ultimately job satisfaction. Because if you're not happy with how something is going, you have an opportunity on a regular basis to let your manager know about that, let your team know about that. That then percolates throughout the rest of the organization. There's one other element, I think. So I talked about sort of people-centered approaches. I talked about agile and sprint specifically. I think a third thing that's really important for us here at Skip is we very openly believe in a blame-free culture. And so what do I mean by that? It's, well, stuff happens in big organizations, particularly big organizations like ours that are moving so quickly. We release literally hundreds of times a week. Sometimes things don't go well when you release, and so we do have outages, or we have problems or create errors or whatnot. The blame-free culture that we have is focused on how do we fix, first of all, what's gone wrong. How do we learn from that so that we can move forward? So the focus is always on moving forward. We don't spend hardly any time at all staring backwards, and we don't at all ever talk about, well, you did this and you should not have done this and whatnot. So it's very much a team effort, and we don't blame people for making mistakes. In fact, we actually say pretty openly, pretty honestly, if you're not making mistakes, probably not trying hard enough. You're probably not moving quickly enough and whatnot. So we have an expectation that people will make mistakes. We also have an expectation that we're going to, when mistakes happen, we're going to get together, we're going to fix the problem as a group, and we're going to use that to learn from so that we can build process or tooling so that we'd never make that mistake again. So not only do we fix it for ourselves, we fix it for everybody. And so again, I think that's a really important cultural element as well, because it tries that with the people mentality, with the agile method, tries to make this a really great place to work and to grow and to be successful together.
That's a great culture, to be honest. So also one more thing that we should take a deeper look. What is the culture for mental health at SkipTheDishes?
So that's an interesting question, actually, because it's also an interesting question for me because I've been with Skip for a long time. 6 years is probably not a long time for many people in their careers, but Skip is only 12 years old, so that's like half of the lifetime of the company. And we have a fond saying that sort of 1 year at Skip is like 5 or 10 years at another place, because we have moved so quickly, right? We've gone from startup in 2012, first order being accepted, to now we do 450,000 orders on a Friday, right? It's a big amount of change and whatnot. And in the early days at Skip, the culture was not the same as it is now. There was a lot of focus in early days on get the job done, and if that meant that you burnt out, well, as long as you got the job done before you burnt out, maybe that was okay. That doesn't cut it here anymore. We're a big organization now. I talked about our people-centered approach. We developed that people-centered approach out of some bitter lessons about what wasn't working in the past. So as you think about specifically mental health, it's something that we actively talk about now. I mentioned the sprint cycle and our sprint retrospectives. The whole reason for doing retrospectives is to engage in and check on how our team health. So for us, mental health is important at the team level as well. Like, how is the team doing? What's working well for us? What's not? And then also at the individual level. And we have a lot of supports in place now that wouldn't even have been thought of or considered back in the early days. So we have a team, for example, mental health first aiders that we train. So we provide training for and accept volunteers into the program around just kind of being a resource and being there for people. So if you are feeling something awkward, or you feel like you're struggling with your mental health, you can reach out to our mental health first aiders, and they can help provide a little bit of guidance and coaching, help you get access to other resources, because these are employees like you and me that are involved in that. So clearly not a professional approach, or meaning they're not professionals. They're not qualified to sort of diagnose medical issues, but they do know how to help you get access to those issues if you need. So just that focus has changed so much in our company, because we realized that we wouldn't be effective if we didn't look after our people. And it's been I think for me, a really rewarding thing to see that change in our culture and that growth and maturity that we have now. So now it's okay for people to take a sick day if you're not really feeling up to it, or if you think that you're overworked. We encourage people to look after themselves, because we know if they look after themselves, then they'll be able to look after us as well.
That's a great green flag if you are looking to work at SkipTheDishes, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody would be. So talking about your personal individuals coming into this bigger company, obviously there is lots of new talent nowadays in IT industry that are looking for jobs, and Skip is one of the major recruiters all over the Canada, and obviously one of the targets for individuals graduating from Canadian institutions. So what is the challenges with the new individuals when you hire them? What are the challenges?
So before I jump to challenges, I'd like to talk about strengths, because part of our people-centered approach is kind of understanding that people are an entire package. They come with both strengths and weaknesses. And I think, as I think about particularly people that are like just coming onto the job market now, they're graduating from university or changing careers or whatnot, coming into the tech world for the first time, I think today's new developers have probably the strongest technical skills of any generation that has passed before them. And they come exposed to so many new tools and new technologies that they're very flexible in how they approach the world. When I started out, a developer might know one programming language or maybe two, and spent a lifetime sort of working in that language. Today, people are coming with 4 or 5 different programming languages, back end, front end, all kinds of a little bit of infrastructure work probably as well. And they also have access to ChatGPT so that they can learn 5, 6, and 7 programming languages, right? So it means new devs today are equipped with some really fantastic problem-solving skills because of that flexibility. But now you asked me about the challenges. I think the challenges actually haven't really changed that much in the 25 plus years that I've been doing this, because I think starting out is always tough for people. It's always been tough. I think, if anything, it's maybe even a little tougher these days, because I think the bar has been raised about how do I find that first job, or how do I get that first job. Because, I mean, if ChatGPT can help you learn a new programming language, then it can also help you and everybody else out there develop a killer resume, right? So, so that's kind of one thing. The second thing is that in a worldwide world, like, access to the internet means now a developer here in Winnipeg is not only competing with the rest of the development community in Winnipeg, but they're probably competing worldwide for that particular position. So I think it's probably a bit harder these days for people to sort of rise above the field in a way that gets them noticed and gets them that sort of initial contact, so that they can get their foot in the door. And then, kind of related to that, in terms of sort of integration or how people might start out, I think it's important for people who are just starting out to remember that they need to bring the whole package. You may have the best technical skills in the world, but if you're miserable to work with, you're not going to last very long at a particular location, right? And it's kind of like an old saw, but it's still pretty true. I can train you for skills, but it's hard for me to train you for attitude, for example. And it's not only attitude; it's that range of of sort of softer skills that become so much more important these days.
That is true. Like, what I would say from my perspective is, apart from all the industry related skills, whichever industry you are going, soft skills is the biggest challenge and is biggest part and the key to success in wherever you go. That is becoming an entrepreneur or becoming a good excelling at your job or whichever thing you do. Soft skill is the biggest part that plays the key
Yeah.
role. So with that, new individuals getting into your company, also you have to get them aligned with your company goals at Skip the Dishes and what your established practices are going on. Since let's say Skip is pretty new company right now, it's a young company, so it has obviously it's still navigating its way into making the established practices from forever. It's like since just 5-6 years you would have developed some practices at the company and they're still evolving.
Of course.
It would be right to say that, right? So what would you do when the new kids come in and you have to align them with the new goals? And also, because there are a couple of challenges with our generation which we regularly see, they don't like working long hours. Some people don't, if they're not passionate, they don't like working long hours, they don't like working straight hardcore at it. They want more breaks, they want more flexibility, they want more stress release that then they have what even began to get the stress.
Sure. So, honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a unique problem for a technology company. It's certainly not a unique problem for Skip the Dishes. It's, you think about, that's like kind of a classic strategy problem is how do you get people all into alignment and all working on the same thing. I would hope that Skip does it better than others, but I think it's going to come back to some of the things that I've already talked about a little bit. I mean, I've already talked about both our people-centered approach and our belief in agile, right? Those are super important, I think, and they both help with this idea around alignment because we talk with people regularly about what their passions are and what excites them. And ideally, we try and find work for them where those passions align with where the company is going. I think it also helps that we're a big company now, and I can bring a lot of opportunity for movement inside of the company. So, if you start out working on a customer experience team, and you find that the customer experience is interesting, but that doesn't really sort of make you excited or whatnot. I have lots of colleagues, and there's enough movement and change going on in the company that I can usually find you a place that will try and ignite those passions. So I think that certainly helps. I think a second thing that's important for us at Skip, and maybe it is because we are still quite a new company, like you talked about, and it's a bit ironic because we do have more than, I think we're 12, coming up on our 12th anniversary now. So we like to say we're a new company, but 12 years is a pretty long time, right? And we have, I don't know what the number is now, it's 33 or 3,400 employees. So it's not like we can say we're a startup anymore, but we can still believe that we are, and we can still kind of act that way. One of the things that we do though that also helps with this alignment is we have a fairly rigorous planning process. In that process, there isn't really a lot of room for people to be working things that we haven't identified as a priority. Generally, I like to say if you're working on something that's not a priority, come and talk to me because I have far more important work for you to be working on. And we, as a company, are still in that sort of sweet spot of still finding new areas to grow in our marketplace where we can make sort of those trade-offs pretty easily about, hey, I can work on this feature that's going to bring me this many new orders. I can very quickly kind of cost out what the impact of that's going to be versus you working on this feature that might save us some money, but I can very quickly make those evaluations. And through our planning process, that helps us say this is more important than that. there's always more work than there are available hands to do it. So work on that instead of this. So that's important. And it like I said, there isn't really a lot of room for teams to be working on things that aren't a priority for the company. So that also helps with alignment.
That's a great way to say that. Yeah, obviously you have trade-off points and you understand finance, so you understand that this cost cutting is okay right now and we can focus on bringing more money orders right now. So, that's a great thing. Also, leading from that, there's the consumer psychology related to this. So how you are in customer experience, you are the head for that, so you probably know the best of the consumer experience from the perspective of tech. So can you guide us, what are the key factors in this digital age that are driving the consumers, and how are you able to sustain that customer growth, everyday marketplace growth? So what is it that entertains people right now?
So I won't say chicken out, but I work with engineers, not psychologists. Okay, so it's really hard for me to comment on that. I also happen to work with a really good group of product owners, product managers, and designers who are a lot more tuned into the customer sentiment than I am. So I'm really speaking on their behalf kind of when I answer, and I get that information sort of from there and from their good graces. With that said, I'm also a big believer in fundamentals, and I think the fundamental desire for the customer these days is to have their needs met, and that really hasn't changed very long or very much historically. I mean, I want my needs met in the most straightforward, fastest and simplest way that I can be. And so since that hasn't changed much over time, I think our tools certainly have changed. The way that we meet those needs has changed, but the underlying fundamentals haven't. So really, it's pretty simple. Figure out what the customer needs, then figure out how to deliver that fastest, best, easiest, and ideally in a way that nobody else has thought of. So maybe not a direct answer to your question, but that's kind of where I'm coming from as the head of engineering and customer experience these days.
Okay, so let's put an example to that. What I have been on the other end of where I'm the customer, and from word of mouth of, let's say, just the drivers or the couriers, as termed for the skip the dishes, who deliver the food. So also from the word of mouth of theirs, and how your practices are there while delivering, and how your app works on their end as well. There are many examples I've heard that, okay, Skip has a standard, and we just hear that as a rumor. I don't know how much truth is in that, but when you order from Skip, you'll get a better food from the same restaurant. You'll have better standards than, let's say, rival companies or any other companies that are running around in Canada. So there is a major tech part, and also the who is dealing with the business owners on the other end. That's a combination of both the contributors, how to keep the standards at the tech in Skip. So how can you explain about the tech, how you keep up the standards? Why is it that that's perception that you have a better standard?
So thank you, first of all, for that. I know our marketing team would love to be able to sort of reproduce that message that our food comes sort of hot and whatnot. It is important to us, by the way, that and maybe this is a Canadian thing, and just a feature of Skip having sort of these Canadian prairie roots and whatnot. I talked about our people-centered approach, and we do care about people. We also care about our customers and whatnot. So it's really important to us to get hot food to hungry customers in a hurry, right? But as we sort of shift back to technology and technology standards around that, there's a lot of pride that helps, and that is also as part of that thing that's built into that people-centered approach. It's important to us that we deliver good software. The blame-free culture certainly helps, because that helps us focusing on continuous improvement and on how do we always get better and learn from our experiences. I mean, we do have standards. One of the things that we do that's a little different from other companies is we invest a lot in people's initial training. We have what we call an incubator program, which many people um, looking from the outside are often kind of appalled at, because we take a brand new developer and we don't immediately put them to working on our production team. We send them through our training program, which means that we pay them for sometimes 3, 4, 5 months to do initial training before we sort of get a lick of production code written out of them. And many people look at that and say, wow, that's an expensive practice. But we believe it's an important practice because, our production teams are running up here and new people who are coming in are here. And if, we just throw those people into a production team right away, the whole team has to sort of dip down in order to help this person come up. Creates a hugely stressful situation for the team, and it creates a hugely stressful situation for the new person who's joining. So we have our incubator to help ramp people up. And in that process, they learn what our standards are. They learn what our approaches are. We provide them feedback and mentoring and guidance in that on how to code the way that we code. And so that helps a lot in thinking about those
great
processes.
Well, I did not know about the incubator program, but honestly, it's an expensive practice, but it's an investment that you look at,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously you ask for an ROI. You get a great return of investment. That's why I've been scaling so fast in 12 years. So let's look at the innovations that you have done recently. So what are the most recent innovations in your sector, customer experience engineering, that has directly impacted the consumers
Sure.
and has brought more returns in the orders or values?
Yeah. So I think one example that I might talk about is sort of how expectations are changing. So as our access to information has changed, as it's easier to, I can pick up my phone now and get food, right? Where 30 years ago you couldn't do that. What it does mean is that our expectations have grown, and as our expectations have grown, our patience has become a little thinner, right? Having access to hot food in 15 minutes is a lot different from where we would have been sort of 20 plus years ago. And so what that means, from thinking about the Skip app in particular, is when, particularly with the thin patients and the higher expectations, if you put the word vegetarian in at the top of the search bar, you want to see cuisine that focuses on and features vegetarian living as sort of the results that are going to come back. And if you see, a whole list of sort of chicken places and whatnot, that's probably not what you were expecting, and that's probably not what you're going to be happy with. Now, understand also that if you're already at the chicken place and you're ordering for a family of 5 with one picky eater, and now I type the word vegetarian into that search, I want that one salad that maybe the chicken place orders to come up, right? So that's a very nuancy kind of an experience. It's very context specific. It's very unique to that experience. So one of the innovations that we're working on is how do we constantly refine and improve our search capabilities so that we understand the context better, we understand what the person is looking for, and we deliver specifically to that person the thing that is best for them at that particular moment. So that's an innovation that we're working on.
That's a great one.
It's a lot.
It's very, I guess, results-driven, statistical-driven thing that you have to perform, and that's a great one. Obviously, I'm vegetarian. I look for vegetarian food, and what I prefer is I get my type of cuisine, or let's say I prefer a couple of cuisines and I want that. So that's a great way.
Yeah.
And I think you're still working on that, right? It's not yet accurate, but
it is a
very
constant
personal.
it's a constant work in progress for us. The other thing to understand is that it's also a big issue, because and it's a complicated issue as well, because part of it is how the restaurant tags themselves, how do they present themselves. It's related to, what has the customer's past been, historically, what have they searched for. So the whole area of search is really wicked, complicated problem. It's a juicy one for engineers to work on, because there's some really exciting things that we can be doing there. But it's a big one, and it affects a lot about your experience with Skip, certainly, and with many other e-commerce platforms.
Obviously, yes, and so it's very person to person, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So do you guys make a group of certain people in that okay, this section of people look at these type of foods? Do you work on that? Do you sectionally divide people and then?
Yeah, without going sort of into too much about the background or the sort of the strategies that we use around that, we certainly look at every person as an individual, and then understand how they might compare to other individuals, and how their buying patterns or their search preferences or whatnot might apply, and we try and lever that information the best that we can. So, if you are very similar to 1,000 other people who typically would order XYZ in the evening, then our search is going to be aware of that, and then more likely to prompt you for things that others have bought. That's not, honestly, shouldn't come as much surprise to many people, because pick a service out there, Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever. There's a pretty common bar at the bottom of the screen now that says, people like you have ordered or have looked at or whatever.
Yeah, it's a general data,
it's a general trend
thing that everybody does, and I think YouTube has done it at their best initially at the first.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we've been the best at it. Like I said, for us, it's a constantly work in progress. We're always trying to refine and improve the product.
Awesome. So let's dive into the hiring practices.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you critically look at in a person's resume when you are looking at hiring them? Obviously, when we were talking in the past, you said that tech is just one of the 5 factors that is important. There are other important things.
So I talked earlier about the whole package, and I think that's critical, particularly when we focus on resumes and around that job search, right? So obviously, I'm going to be looking for good technical fundamentals, right? But a lot of those things that we call soft skills, like problem solving, like teamwork, self-awareness, honesty, integrity, social confidence, openness to change, ability to admit when you make a mistake, ability to recover from a mistake, resiliency, and kind of just good old-fashioned grit. Those kinds of things are things that really are important to me, and are things that we look for in resumes. Earlier we talked about performance, right? At Skip, we build our performance framework actually around 4 pillars that sort of capture and encompass that. So our 4 main pillars: technology, obviously a very important one, but only one of 4, right? Agile mindset, which is more than, do I just, can I follow the Agile ceremonies and whatnot? Lots of people sort of play at Agile. What we're looking for are, do you really understand what that means? When we talk about resiliency, how do you get around barriers? How do you respond to problems, right? So how do you adjust, adapt, and change? We talk about communication and community involvement. So the communications area is where most people would sort of lump many of these things that we call soft skills. How do you interact with people? How do you talk to others? Are you articulate? Can you carry on a conversation and whatnot? But we also bring the community contribution part to that, which is, I expect, especially in these days, I talked earlier about how easy it is to sort of glean information off of the internet. Okay, for me, it's important to understand, you give back to your community. So are you one of those persons that just sucks everything in, or Do you take something in? Do you work on it? Do you improve it? Do you send back? It's one of the reasons, for example, why I really respect the work that you're doing here with this tech podcast, because it shows an example of not only you take information in, but you then want to make it available to others. So that community contribution is important for us. The fourth area on our pillars is leadership, and it's kind of related, right? Leadership is not only about how do you get things done, but can you help others get things done as well? Can you demonstrate the ability to work on a project, be a good follower, certainly, but also recognize when the project, might be failing. And, we say, again, it's another old saw, but it's really important. Leadership is not a job title, right? It's an experience. It's a thing that you bring. And so that's the fourth area that we look at. And whether so I talked about consistency and integration, right? Those four things are part of our performance evaluation framework here. It's really important for us that we talk about all four of those kinds of things. And I think it's also then really important to say, look, if we're going to bring you in, we're going to evaluate you on these things, then I want to start that evaluation process when we're looking at a resume. And so I'm looking for those four areas on a resume.
That's a great insight for everybody who's looking job right now at Skip. And so just related to those guidelines, what are the best tips for the youth who is coming into the tech right now, into the tech scene, who is looking for a job? Or let's first talk about only the one who are looking to get employed, for the job seekers. What are the best tips they should follow before getting graduated?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, I already mentioned how I think it's really hard starting out generally. So I really am very empathetic to the people that are just starting out. I know it's been a while for me because I'm not just starting out, but I know how hard it is to get going, and I work with a lot of people who are just getting started. So I kind of start from there. I think from a practical perspective, I think people need to see their career development and finding that first job, both from a strategic point of view and then also from a tactical point of view. So on the strategic level, think about your overall goals, and then think about how you're presenting yourself and what are you doing now, and whether that's all consistent or part of the same kind of package. And think about, what am I doing right now to help me with those overall goals, because that then can help sort of give you some at the next level, at the tactical approach. It helps to at least establish some guidelines or boundaries for you to work on. At the tactical level, I think my advice to people would be to approach finding that job, especially if it's your first job, approach it as a project. So spend time researching and learning about what are current approaches to job hunting. Make sure your resume is modern and highlights your good features. Also make sure it's honest. Okay, and this is something I keep coming back to. Nothing turns me off as much as reading a resume that says, hey, I have expert skills in database management. And when I look through the resume, I say, okay, well, where did that come from? And then when I interview the candidate, it's because they had one course in database management at university, right? One course is not going to make you an expert. So don't put that language on your resume, because you're going to turn me off right off the bat. And you don't want the person who's looking at your resume to be turned off, or to sort of start immediately in building this relationship with you by questioning your integrity, right? So I think that's important. And I think kind of most importantly, remember that hiring managers are looking for a candidate who will solve their immediate problems. And that's so important. Do everything that you can to position yourself as that person who will solve the hiring manager's problems. And all of a sudden, it starts to get very tricky as you go in, because remember that probably the problems for a hiring manager at SkipTheDishes are different from the problems for a hiring manager at Neo Financial, or at any other company. So what it means is that you need to tailor your pitch and probably your resume and whatnot accordingly, so that you stand out of the pack as the person who can solve that specific hiring manager's problem.
So curate it to that, do the research, curate it to that specific
Yeah.
company's problems and how you are solving their issues.
Yeah, and again, I to go back to what I very first said when we started this segment, I appreciate how hard it is to be able to do that, how much time and investment that you need to make in order to do that. But nothing sort of turns me off more quickly than me posting, like, let's say I'm looking for an experienced Java developer role. And I see the people who aren't really tailoring or thinking about my needs. They're just in panic, applying to everything that's out there in the hope that I spread enough stuff around and I might get a hit, right? So if I'm looking for a Java developer and your skills are React and Node.js, I don't think it's your best value return on your investment for applying for my role.
Yeah.
Right.
So also, I heard one statement, and you know who said it. The one thing that I think beginners need to also take care of, that obviously companies like Skip are good for you, but what hiring managers look at is, are you good for them? They have to
Yeah.
be selfish for their role outside of compulsion. Are you good for them? Because there are hundreds of people applying in just a week, under a
Yeah.
week. I mean, it's too exaggerated time for this bigger company. In 2-3 days, there are 100+ piles of applications. So you have to be the good for them. Obviously, company is good for you. They know that.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice as well. For me, it's about, again, thinking tactically about each individual job that you're applying for. That can help influence sort of how and what you might answer in a job interview, for example. And again, that example is one that I have used in the past. I almost always start off my interviews with a general question to sort of get people talking and break the ice and whatnot. And I'll often ask them, like, what interests you about coming to work for Skip? And I get a lot of people who tell me, oh, it'd be great for my career. It would help me get along, help me move forward. I'm always really interested in working with a big company. And all of those things are good. And, they help me get to know you a little bit better and whatnot. But all of those things are focused, again, as what you said, is that I already know that the SkipTheDishes, like, I know that about SkipTheDishes. I know that we are likely going to be a good stepping stone for you on your career. But I'm thinking when I'm interviewing about my problems, and my problems are things that I'm looking for. Can you help me solve my problems?
Awesome. That's a great tip for everybody who is looking at job right now. So I have prepared one rapid fire for you.
Okay.
Before going to that, so I have a couple of things to discuss with you.
Okay.
So let's look at the final question. What is the future trends that you are looking in IT that is going to dominate the field?
Yeah. I think it wouldn't be a podcast in 2024 if we didn't talk about artificial intelligence in some way. So for me, AI is, I think it's really, as I think about AI today, I think it's kind of like how Excel was for accountants in the 1990s. And there's a lot of parallel conversations around that most people today are not old enough or weren't engaged enough to sort of understand. But we heard a lot of the same conversations about, is AI going, or is Excel going to eliminate the need for accountants in the first place and whatnot? Is it going to make accounting redundant and all of those kinds of things? And what we actually saw is, Excel is a tool. And I think artificial intelligence these days, I would approach it much the same way. It's a tool. Some will learn to use that tool to their advantage. That'll make them better professionals. Others will find that the work that they're doing right now might be better, faster, cheaper done by a machine. And those people will either adapt to that and learn from it, or they will find that they're going to have a hard time. So for me, AI is going to be a big thing. I don't think it's really changed much in the last 50 years. I don't know that it will change much in the next 50 years. As you think about that, the best defense against change is always this resiliency and ability to adapt and learn.
Yes.
So that's a big thing. To bring that specifically to something that we're doing here at SkipTheDishes, already talked about the example, the search example that we're looking at, and that vegetarian search in particular, why that's such a nuancy problem. That's an area that obviously we're bringing artificial intelligence into the game, both to help learn and understand how people react and to be able to model that behavior better. But then also there's the practical problem. We have these days over 50,000 restaurant partners on our network, and increasingly an incredible variety. So convenience stores, grocery stores, gifts, flowers, all kinds of different things, right? So the ability to figure out how are we going to deal with that really very large ecosystem and adapt it, and nobody's going to want to go through 50,000 restaurant partners and tag them all by hand. So if we can look at ways that we can use things like artificial intelligence to help us manage that problem, that's going to be a huge win for us. And ultimately, that's going to make the experience better for the customer. It's going to help us reduce our costs, and that becomes then a win-win situation for everybody.
Awesome. So obviously one thing that you mentioned, that was the first reason, like one of the most key factors I wanted to start the podcast, is enlightening people that there is no need to be afraid from AI, but actually use it as a stepping stone and integrate it and get adapted to it, right? But people obviously baffled in the beginning when ChatGPT was released, and it is bringing new versions like 4.0 has just released right now, which takes memory
Yep.
across the chats and across the computers, so it remembers everything that you asked, doesn't matter which PC you are in, and it is going towards new technology that is AGI, that will automatically do the things in your computer that you tell it to do, and take over your computer if it wants to. So from that, let's go to the rapid fire now.
Sure.
So here, just one rule: just select one thing.
Okay.
You can't
Can't do
two things.
both. Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So the first thing, when you're looking for a junior developer, would you be looking at a grad from a good university like University of Toronto, Waterloo, or MIT graduate? That respectable universities that are in the top 8 or 10 universities around the North America, or it would be a person having a little bit of experience at the startup from the learning entire SDLC, software development lifecycle, spending a couple of years at startup, or spending a couple of years at FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Google.
So Skip is very definitely biased towards startup folks.
That's a great one. Love that. Okay, the second one: drone delivery versus roadways delivery.
For us, roadway, at least for the short term.
If both are available.
If both are available, I still don't trust the drone yet. So
Great.
I'm still looking for a driver to hand me my food.
Looking at your background, finance or tech, if you had to select one.
Tech.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Derek, again for doing this. It was a great experience and awesome. All the insights that I learned about Skip I had never learned that before. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving me that time.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So that was a great one. So